Chapter 13. Anne clutched her stomach again. Oh, the pains were little more than 5 minutes apart now, and she was sure they still had miles to go before reaching the hospital. The road was an obstacle course of boards, tree branches, power poles, and assorted other forms of debris. And poor little Jessie, she could barely see over the dashboard as the car crept down the road. Greg, stretched out in the back seat, grunted and groaned in pain, especially when they'd go over a large bump, which was quite often. Bam! Another tyre blew out. Anne had been keeping count. That was the last one. 4 flats now. She gasped in pain and tried to paint a smile on her face as she looked at Jessica. "You're doing fine, baby, just fine. But Mummy, we've got another flat tyre. How can we keep going? Oh, sweetie, at this point, ouch, it doesn't matter. There's no other traffic to worry about." Greg gave a little laugh, even as a massive hunk of roofing struck the windshield. "Look at it this way, sweetie. You don't have to worry about washing the car when we get home," he said. Jessica gave a little jump as more trash beat and battered the car. The passenger window next to Anne cracked from a fence post crashing into it, and Jessica revved the car to get it up and over a downed power pole in the road. "Hold on!" she shouted. "Ow!" Greg cried out as they landed with a heavy thud on the other side of the pole. "Sweetie, easy there. Your old man has a tender heart." "Sorry, Daddy, but I don't want to drive around the pole. We'll end up in the mud." Anne patted Jessica's arm. "It's okay, sweetie. We understand. You're being a smart girl. We're on nothing but rims now. You stay on the pavement." Out the window, the hospital suddenly loomed like a fortress of safety. Anne smiled. They were nearly there. Then she looked closer and felt a different pain creep into her stomach. The top floor of the building was gone, ripped away. Jessica didn't seem to notice anything unusual about the place. She was very intent on getting into the parking lot. She drove the car up the short driveway to the emergency room door, the wheel rims screeching and grinding the whole way. The building had a small roof overhanging the entryway, so they had a little protecting from the elements, but not much. As Jessie opened the door and jumped out, a blast of wind roared through the car. Anne managed to get her door open and was promptly drenched by the driving rain. The wind was howling and blowing so hard the raindrops were practically coming down horizontally. Anne managed to swing her legs out of the car even as Jessica returned with the medical staff. "Hang on, ma'am, we've got you," a nurse called out over the roar of the storm. "Oh, my husband is in the back, broken leg," Anne said. A doctor popped the back door open. "We'll take care of him too." With that, they got everyone inside. Anne could feel her labour pains building, and she knew there was very little time left before the baby came. The staff did their best to get her and Greg settled, even as other patients needed care. The emergency room, a place of curtained exam areas, a check-in desk and rows of seats, was overflowing with all manner of people. Beds and gurneys were full. People sat and crouched on the wet floor, and huge gaping holes dotted the tile ceiling. Large numbers of tiles had collapsed to the floor. Stains covered the areas around the holes, and water dripped down all over the place. Meanwhile, doctors and nurses worked to tend the injured and calm the worried. "Call OB," a doctor called out. "We've got a woman here about to deliver." "Get X-ray on the double," another said, getting Greg on a gurney. They rolled Anne into one of the exam areas and pulled the curtain around her for privacy. As they started to get her clothes off, the lights flashed and she heard Jessica give a little squeak of surprise. "Don't worry, little one," a woman's voice said. "We have generators to keep us going. Your mummy and daddy will be fine." Anne smiled. They'd made it. Now if they could just get through the coming hours. The general smiled as he looked up at the big flat-screen TV in the conference room. He didn't have to be a psychic to know that everyone else there was also smiling. The news coming out of Florida was glorious for them. Massive damage to the state's infrastructure meant huge construction contracts for their companies. Images, obviously shot from a helicopter, showed Port Charlotte and Punta Gorda in ruins. The general even recognized the hotel that Mr. Smith had stayed at, virtually flattened. As with so many news reports, other news items were scrolling along the bottom edge of the screen that contained even better news. Numerous offshore oil platforms had been damaged, resulting in yet another very nice spike in oil prices. "Very good, my friends," Croesus said. "It would appear we will have a banner year." General Lowe slowly rose to his feet. "Oh, and that's not all. People, we will be ranking in huge profits very soon." "Oh, care to elaborate on that, General?" Croesus said. "Of course, sir," he replied. Pointing his clicker at the screen, he pushed a button. The picture changed to an overview of the Atlantic and the eastern seaboard. Off to the east was a gathering storm. "That, gentlemen, is Finale, the next storm of the season, and as of June 6, It is officially a hurricane. That little darling will be the single biggest cash cow for us ever." "And why is that?" Blue said. A click and a series of computer tracks appeared. They showed the storm ploughing into Florida's east coast, cutting across central Florida and coming out somewhere around Tampa. From there, the cone of probable tracks spread from New Orleans to central Texas. "These are the official projected tracks for this storm, and they'll be leaked to the press later today," Stefano said. "When people learn of this, the value of U.S. oil stocks will plummet." Croce snorted. "Aren't you being just a little overconfident, General? Why would people believe that the storm is going to go this way?" Another click and the image changed. The tracks for Hurricane Edward appeared on the screen. With the actual course superimposed on top of them, they all agreed perfectly. "These are the tracks for our current storm," Stefano said. "They're also going to be leaked to the press. When people see how accurate these computer models were, they'll believe the one for finale." "I'm impressed, General," Croce said. "I had no idea your models were so good." Stefano laughed. "They're not. Only one of the models was right. However, it was a simple matter to correct them. The public will never know." "Excellent," Croce cried, his voice full of glee. "General, you have truly outdone yourself this time. Gentlemen, we need to immediately boost our selling short on as many U.S. oil companies as possible. We stand to rake in more than we've ever known. Now, General, what is the probability of the storm actually following this most delightful path?" "Well, that's hard to say," he replied. "If the storm continues to build as expected, we think it's going to be quite massive, and if the weather pattern holds, it should rip up Florida quite nicely. When you consider how built up the 1-4 corridor, the area around Orlando is, the damages could be in the billions. As for Texas and the oil platforms, it's too early to tell. We can only hope for the best." The room echoed with laughter. Kelly and her staff were sprawled across desks, chairs, and the one couch they'd managed to salvage from an office. It had been a long day, and they'd finally cut power long about sunset. They had to conserve their fuel for the coming day, so the night was spent in virtual total darkness. Come the dawn, they slept quite late, and Kelly woke up with her mouth tasting like the bottom of a birdcage. Oh, did she wish she had a toothbrush or some mouthwash? Wiping the sleep from her eyes, she walked past her sleeping co-workers and pushed open the door to her office. Oh, what a difference a day makes. There was nothing there. The door opened out onto open air. That entire side of the building had been torn away. "Well, I guess I don't have to worry about vacuuming the carpeting today," she said with just a touch of sarcasm. Off in the distance she could see mile upon mile of destruction. Homes, businesses, cars, trucks, and everything else imaginable. The sky was rather overcast. It looked like it would rain soon. Yeah, that was typical. A storm usually sucked all manner of storm fronts in behind it. Just what these poor people needed, torn apart by a Category 4 and then rained on. She closed the door and moved back to the centre of the room, stepping up on top of her desk as she scanned the room. "Okay, people, wakey, we got a job to do, and we've slept long enough," Kelly called out. Several people snapped awake while others barely budged. Oh, this wasn't going to be easy. Christina, her long blonde hair looking more like a bird's nest, slowly got to her feet. "What's on the agenda for today, Kelly?" "Step 1, Simon. See about getting the generator going again with the reserved fuel," Kelly replied. "Christina, check on the phones. I'll break out the radios and we can see about connecting with the world again." Christina clapped her hands. "Okay, people, you heard the lady. Let's move with a purpose." They broke up and woke up as needed and got to work. Kelly's mind raced. She had to wonder, how was her family? Was Daniel all right? And what about all of her friends? How long would it be before she reached them? Within the hour, things were a bit improved. The backup power was on, which meant they had the computers and major mechanical devices operating, but not the air conditioning. It wasn't long before they were sweltering and frankly glad that most of the windows had blown out. Of course, they were those pesky mosquitoes, but better a few of them than being roasted alive by the heat. The news reporters gained a dreary picture of conditions throughout the area. Kelly felt a gnawing pain in the pit of her stomach. There were no reports in Arcadia. The community wasn't considered important enough, she guessed. She had no clue as to what had happened to the area. She tried the phone. No signal, not even a busy signal. The line was completely dead. She tried her cell phone. Nothing there either. The radio crackled and a voice started to break through the static. "Kelly, can you hear me? Over," Heidi said. "Yes, Heidi, I'm here," Kelly replied. "Where are you? Over." "Coming down I-75, just north of Northport. Over," Heidi said. "Holy cow, how'd you get down here so fast?" Over." Heidi laughed. Kelly, the minute we saw the storm change course, we hopped in our cars and headed back. You at the office? Over. Kelly acknowledged that and proceeded to give Heidi a full rundown on their situation. Heidi informed her that the National Guard was with them and that they were bringing full supplies of food, water and other necessities with them. They'd been there within the hour, barring any major road blockage. Kelly laughed. In that case, I'll expect you around noon. Over. That bad, Kel? Over. Heidi said. Kelly stood at the large picture window that looked over the southern half of the area and US 41. Maybe put it this way, Heidi. Nothing's moving on 41, and I'd be hard-pressed to separate the pavement from the debris. Over. Well then, I guess it's a good time we brought bulldozers, Heidi said. See you soon. Over. She signed off. Kelly yawned, stretched, and tried to come to life. Rubbing the back of her neck, she caught sight of a TV screen out of the corner of her eye. Her head whipped around and her jaw dropped. What the? Hey, Christina, turn that up. She did so, and there on the screen was a report on the upcoming storm and its projected track. The thing that shocked Kelly was the fact that the newscaster was standing before a split screen. On the right was the track for Finale. On the left, the tracks for Edward, and they all showed it going straight into Port Charlotte. Kelly slowly approached the screen, her teeth grinding so hard that she felt a pounding of pain in her jaw. That image was a lie, a complete and total fabrication. She almost laughed. Daniel had wanted proof of a conspiracy. Well, there it was, right up there on the flat screen. Someone was manipulating the past. The questions plaguing her right now were, why? What could that same someone gain from this? She didn't know how, where, or when, but she was going to figure it out. But that was for later. Right now she had a job to do, and she was going to do it. She only hoped and prayed that a report would come in on Arcadia so that she might have some hint of what had befallen her family. Daniel stood in the college's parking lot and looked over the storm damage. Danny, where you go? Olga called out from behind him. It's not safe. He turned to face her and smiled. Mama Olga, it's okay. It'll be fine. Look, the storm's gone and the sun is sort of coming out. I've got to go and check on my dad. But Danny, look at the road. It's big mess. How you get around? How you get petrol? Well, I may have to stop every once in a while to clear some debris, but fuel is not a problem for me, remember? He said, patting his car. She smiled. Yeah, you got the veggie fuel. Well, okay then, but you promising me you be careful? He nodded. Absolutely, I'll be back as soon as I can. If I see any police or emergency personnel, I'll tell them everyone's here. They'll bring more food and supplies. You sure about that? Fabio said, stepping out the door of the college. After all, the folks in New Orleans had to wait days. Things are different now, Ronald snapped, also emerging from the building. I'm sure help is on its way right now. Daniel nodded. I agree with Ronald. However, that doesn't mean we should just sit around on our duffs and wait for help. I'm going to go check on my pop and Kelly. Fabio, Ronald, why don't you go pester Tony into stopping by here for a visit? If he gives you any guff about Roscoe not being allowed, tell him Roscoe can just run around outside. Oh, good point, Danny boy, Fabio said. He turned to Ronald. Come along, me buddy. To the Batmobile. With that, they all hopped in their cars and took off. As Daniel expected, the road was a bit cluttered, but once he got on 41, it was suddenly clear. His brow wrinkled, and he couldn't understand it. How in the world could the road be wide open? As he reached the centre of town, he got his answer. There was a whole convoy of military trucks parked outside the county administration building and the nearby weather centre. He slowly nodded. Yeah, help had arrived. Good, because it was clear they needed it. As he drove down 41, he marvelled at the destruction all around him. Daniel passed the little strip mall where the dance studio was. It had been knocked flat as a pancake. A few minutes later, he turned at the intersection where Fawcett Memorial Hospital was located. The building looked as if a bomb had gone off on the top floors. The entire top floor of the building was gone, and most of the floor below had been smashed in. The parking lot was packed. Cars, trucks, ambulances, and all manner of vehicles were everywhere. And then there was the debris of anything and everything that you'd find in the average home was strewn about. Daniel had to do a double take when he caught sight of a toilet crammed into the windshield of a pickup truck. Cruising down the back roads toward home, he saw more of the same. A fence post driven straight through one of the few remaining power poles, cars crushed by fallen trees, huge old oak trees snapped like twigs, and all manner of bric-a-brac was scattered from rooftop to drainage ditch. Daniel wondered, how was the house? How was Pop? Oh, he could just imagine poor Gabby. She must be going mad with worry, but there was no way of getting in touch with her. Short of driving up there, he actually had to laugh at the prospect of doing that. He could just see it turning into a comedy of errors. He'd go racing up there only to discover that she'd come charging down here to look for him and Pop. That was the answer. If she was anywhere, she was at Pop's, which he would be as well. In just a few minutes, looking around the neighbourhood, Daniel was encouraged by what he saw. While there was extensive damage, the home seemed to be largely intact. Turning onto Pop Street, he strained to look and saw that the house was, in fact, in one piece. He wanted to pull into the drive, but that wasn't possible. There was far too much junk piled there. Daniel had pulled up in front of the place and parked. Somehow, he had a feeling that there would not be much traffic today, so parking in the street was okay. "Pop, are you okay?" he called out, bounding into the front door. He scanned the room. The place was quite messy, but not in anything more than the usual fashion. The windows were solid and the roof showed no signs of leaks. Still more good news. Alex appeared in the bedroom door, a bit misheveled, but none the wiser for wear and tear. "Danny, what are you doing here?" "Checking on you, Pop. Gee, we just had a major storm." "What else would I be doing?" Daniel said. "Well, I'm fine. You didn't have to bother," Alex replied. "Pop, it's not a bother. After all, no matter what, I'm still your son. Are you okay? Do you want me to help you with the clean-up, or—" "No, you can go," Alex snapped. Daniel sighed. "Still not ready to patch things up, huh? Okay, so be it, Pop, I'll go." With that, he sadly plodded from the house. Looking around the yard, Daniel couldn't help but see the area as a perfect metaphor for how he was feeling. Hurricane Edward had torn the community to bits, and his own father had done the same to him. Getting back into his car, he decided to see if Kelly was at the hurricane center. As he drove slowly up 41, he could see the first stirrings of life returning to the community. People were starting to emerge from the homes and buildings, and there were many people swarming about the hospital. A number of military trucks had pulled up in the parking lot, and they were unloading food, water, fuel, and all kinds of supplies. It only took a few minutes to reach Kelly's office. The road was much clearer now, and he was surprised to see Ronald's car in the lot. The place was jammed with all manner of vehicles, so Daniel parked off to the side and made his way inside. The first floor was a total mess, water everywhere, soaked furniture, smashed computers, and broken glass strewn about. He bounded up the stairs and looked about. Was she here? Was she okay? "Daniel," Kelly called out to him. Turning, he saw her, and she promptly ploughed into him as they embraced. Over her shoulder, she could see Ronald and Fabio. They were standing off to the side with Roscoe. "Oh, Kelly, am I glad to see you," he said. "Guys, where's—" His voice trailed off as he saw the expressions on their faces. They spoke volumes. Daniel looked at Roscoe, he looked at the guys, and he felt how tightly Kelly was hugging him. Words were unnecessary. He knew what had happened, and he wept. Fabio and Ronald came over, and they shared a group hug of support for a few minutes. After that, Fabio and Ronald gave Daniel a brief rundown of what they'd learned, and that the National Guard was taking Tony's body to the hospital for proper disposition. He then related his experience with his father and asked about Kelly's family. She shook her head. "Still no word. I'm worried about them, but there's no way for me to get to the Arcadia."
"Can't you drive over?"
Fabio asked. "My car doesn't have much gas, and with the power out, there's no way to get it filled." Daniel smiled. "Hey, my car's got a full tank, and I got a couple of extra cans of fuel at home, so why don't I drive you over?" "How'd you manage that?" she said. "Well, when you have a car that runs on veggie power, you don't have to worry about no stinking gas stations." Kelly smiled and nodded. "Okay, great. Let me tell Heidi and make sure she can spare me, and we can take off." They walked over to Kelly's boss, and she was happy to let Kelly go. After all, she'd certainly done her job on this storm. She gave Kelly one of their radios and told her to file a report on conditions in Arcadia. As they had no staff there, they'd have no word as to the extent of damages. Kelly's face grew stern as she caught sight of the TV. Daniel turned and saw a bulletin coming in on a new storm. Finale. It was already a Category 3 and building. "Wow, is that the next storm?" Daniel said. Kelly nodded. "Yes, it's building incredibly fast and picking up speed. Heidi, I've got a bad feeling about this one. This could be it. This one could truly go off the scale. It's built up faster than any storm I've ever seen." "I agree," Heidi replied, then sighed and slowly shook her head. "But Kelly, there's no way we're getting anyone to listen to us. First, all attention is focused on the recovery efforts for Edward, and second, there's still no hope of any of the senior staff believing your Category 6 theory." Kelly nodded. "I know, but could you keep me posted as to its progress?" "Of course. As soon as you check on your family, if they're okay, try to get me a full report on conditions in Arcadia. I sent a couple of the National Guard trucks out there, so King's Highway should be clear. If you need anything, get in touch with them. Got it?" "Will do, and thanks again, Heidi." With that, Kelly and Daniel headed out into the parking lot and got into his car. It took a while for him to reach King's Highway. Not all of the roads were cleared yet. Still, once there, it was a clear shot out to Arcadia. As they rode along, they exchanged details on how they weathered the storm. Have you heard from anyone else? She asked. No word from Gabby or Greg and Anne, Daniel said. Then his brow wrinkled. Wait a minute, the hospital. When I drove by, I think I saw Greg and Anne's car there. You sure? Daniel chewed his lip. No, they just got a new Lexus, and there was one by the side door when I went by. Kelly slowly nodded. Well, we shouldn't let it worry us. Maybe it's not them. And even if it is, maybe they had to go there for the baby. I've heard that the low pressure during storms can cause women to go into labour. Hey, what about your sister, Kim, and her husband? They okay? Yeah, they're up on Cape Cod on vacation. Thanks for asking. I'll have to swing by their place and check on it later. For now, I'm worried about my parents. Knowing that, Daniel drove faster. King's Highway was completely deserted, and the buildings all along the way were a litany of destruction. The area was essentially farm's way and cattle territory, so homes were few and far between, but every one was crushed beyond recognition. A roar came from above, and they leaned out to look. Helicopters were flying overhead. Some were news reporters, the others military, and they were spreading out across the countryside. One swung low over the remains of a stately home. It looked like a Lego model scattered across the yard. Daniel could see the muscles in Kelly's jaw twitching as she tugged and pulled on her hair. It didn't take a psychic to know what she was thinking. She was worried about her family. Would their home look like these?